There is a specific moment right before you fall asleep when your body finally stops pretending. You are not thinking about your to-do list anymore. You are not rehearsing the conversation you should have had differently. For 3 or 4 seconds, there is nothing between you and the truth of how tired you actually are. And in that gap, something quiet and honest rises up before you can stop it. A thought that sounds less like a sentence and more like a confession. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Not the dishes, not the job, not even the marriage or the kids or the bills. The holding. The constant, invisible effort of holding everything together so it doesn't all come apart in front of people counting on you. That is not burnout in the way people use the word casually, something that happens to people who work too many hours. What is happening to you is different, with a specific internal mechanism, and naming it precisely matters more than naming it gently. You have spent so long managing your exhaustion that you have stopped noticing it as exhaustion at all. It has become your baseline. You wake up tired and call it Tuesday. You go to bed tired and call it normal. Somewhere along the way, the tiredness stopped being a signal and became a setting. The water you swim in without remembering there was ever dry land. Here is the mechanism. Exhaustion that gets named gets addressed. You feel tired, you rest, the tiredness lifts at least partially. But exhaustion that gets absorbed, folded quietly into your identity, treated as just who you are now, never gets addressed because there is nothing left to address. It has become you. And so you keep functioning, keep showing up, keep saying you're fine, while underneath, a kind of quiet erosion continues, day after day, the way water wears down stone without anyone noticing until the shape of the rock has actually changed. This is the diagnosis, and I want to say it as clearly as I can. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are not failing some test of faith that everyone else seems to be passing while you struggle. What is happening inside you is the natural, physiological, spiritual result of carrying weight for too long without being allowed to set it down, not even for a moment. And somewhere in that long carrying, a question has started forming, one you have maybe never said out loud, not even to yourself in the mirror. If God is real and God is good, why does holding on feel like the only option, and why does no one, not even God, seem to be offering to carry this with me? I'm not going to rush past that question. I'm not going to hand you a verse and tell you to feel better. Because the exhaustion you are carrying is not abstract. It has a shape. Maybe it is the specific weight of being the strong one in your family, the person everyone calls when something breaks, while no one ever calls to ask how you're holding up. Maybe it is the slow grind of a marriage where you keep showing up emotionally and keep being met with silence, until showing up itself starts to feel like a performance you're not sure you can keep giving. Maybe it is a body that won't cooperate anymore, pain that doctors can't quite explain, a fatigue that sleep doesn't touch. Maybe it is simply years of believing that if you just held on a little longer things would finally ease up, and they haven't, and you are starting to wonder if anyone is even watching. There is a particular cruelty in being tired in a way that looks, from the outside, like nothing is wrong. People do not bring meals for invisible exhaustion. There is no casserole for the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes while you smile and say good morning. You have learned to function at a level just high enough that no one worries about you, and just low enough that you are quietly disappearing inside your own life. That is the precise mechanism of what you are carrying, not a single crisis but 1,000 small ones stacked so high and so quietly that even you have stopped counting them. And so when I say I see you, I don't mean it as a phrase. I mean I see the specific weight, the version of tired that has nothing to do with how many hours you slept last night, and everything to do with how many years you've spent being the one who doesn't get to fall apart. I see the prayers that have started feeling like static, words you say out of habit because stopping feels too frightening, even though you're not sure anyone is on the other end anymore. I see the way you've started bracing yourself before answering the phone because lately every call seems to need something from you, and you have so little left to give. This is the part where I am supposed to tell you that you are not alone, and I will, but not yet, because right now that phrase would bounce off you like rain on a closed window. You have heard it before. It has not made the tiredness lighter. What I want to do instead is sit with you in the specific texture of what this exhaustion actually feels like, because pain that is named precisely starts to lose some of its grip, even before anything changes about the circumstances themselves. This is the exhaustion of waiting for relief that keeps not arriving. You prayed about the job and it didn't change. You prayed about the relationship and it didn't soften. You prayed about your own heart, asking God to just make this easier somehow, and the days kept arriving exactly the same weight as before. There is a particular kind of fatigue that comes not from the difficulty itself, but from the difficulty refusing to end, the chronic nature of it, the way it doesn't break, it just continues and continues until you start to wonder if continuing is simply what your life is going to be. And underneath all of that, there is something even quieter, something you may not have said to anyone. A fear that if you finally let go, if you finally stopped holding everything together for even one day, it would all collapse and it would be your fault and you would have to live with having been the one who let it fall. So you don't let go. You can't let go. You grip tighter because the alternative feels like failure, like proof that you were never strong enough to begin with. I want to gently challenge that fear, not by dismissing it, but by asking you a question you may not have asked yourself. What if holding on was never supposed to mean carrying it entirely by yourself? What if the command to endure, the command to persevere, was never meant to be a solo act of willpower, but an invitation into a kind of strength that is shared, sourced from somewhere outside your own depleted reserves? There is a man in the Bible who reached this exact point, not metaphorically but literally. His name was Elijah, and he had just done something extraordinary, standing alone against 450 prophets of a false god, calling fire down from heaven in front of an entire nation, watching God show up in a way that should have settled every doubt for the rest of his life. And then, almost immediately after that victory, a death threat reached him and something in him simply broke. He ran into the wilderness, sat down under a solitary tree and asked God to let him die. Not metaphorically. He said, "It is enough, Lord, take my life." Sit with that for a moment because it matters. This was not a man with weak faith. This was a man who had just witnessed fire fall from the sky in answer to his own prayer. And yet here he was, days later, completely undone, not by the threat itself but by the cumulative weight of everything he had been carrying, the isolation, the spiritual intensity, the sheer exhaustion of having held the line for so long with no one else standing beside him. Elijah's collapse was not a failure of faith. It was the natural consequence of a body and a spirit that had given everything they had, with nothing left in reserve. And here is what I want you to notice about how God responded, because it is not what most of us expect. God did not appear to Elijah in that moment and deliver a speech about faith and courage. God did not quote Elijah's own victories back to him as a pep talk. Instead, the angel of the Lord touched him while he slept, and said simply, "Arise and eat." That was the entire instruction. Not a sermon. Not a rebuke for his despair. Food and rest, and then more food and more rest, because God knew something we often forget, that exhaustion is not primarily a spiritual problem to be lectured out of someone. Sometimes it is simply exhaustion, and what it requires first is care for the body God gave you, before any conversation about strength or perseverance even begins. Elijah slept. He ate what had been prepared for him. He slept again. Only after his body had been tended to did he have the strength to walk 40 days to Horeb, the mountain of God, where the real conversation would happen. God did not rush him toward healing or demand he snap out of it before being allowed rest. The care came first. And I think that is something many of us, especially those of us who have absorbed exhaustion into our identity, desperately need to hear, that being depleted is not a moral failure requiring correction, but a human condition requiring care. When Elijah finally arrived at the mountain, God asked him a question, the same question twice. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah's answer is raw in a way that Scripture rarely allows its heroes to be. "I have been very zealous for the Lord," he said, "but the people have turned against me, and I am the only one left, and they are trying to take my life too." There is no performance in that answer, no spiritual polish. It is simply a man telling God the truth about how alone and how finished he feels. And God did not argue with him or say, "That's not true, you're being dramatic, you still have plenty of strength left." Instead, God told him to go stand on the mountain, and then something happened that speaks directly into the exhaustion you are carrying right now. A powerful wind tore the mountains apart, but the Lord was not in the wind. Then an earthquake, and the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then a fire, and the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound. Some translations call it a still, small voice, others a gentle whisper. That is where God was. Not in the spectacle Elijah might have expected after everything he had been through, but in the quiet, the almost imperceptible sound that required him to stop, to listen, to lean in close enough to hear it at all. I wonder if that is exactly where you need to find God right now too. Not in some dramatic breakthrough you keep waiting for, not in a sudden surge of strength that erases the exhaustion overnight, but in something quieter. A whisper close enough to your own breaking point that you have to stop gripping everything so tightly just to hear it. Maybe the relief you have been praying for was never going to arrive as a wind that clears everything away in one motion. Maybe it arrives the way it arrived for Elijah, gently, in food and rest, and a voice that simply asks, "What are you doing here?" and waits for your honest answer. After that mountain encounter, God did something else worth noticing. God did not send Elijah back out to fight alone. God gave him Elisha, a companion, someone to walk beside him, someone to eventually carry the weight after him. The isolation that had nearly destroyed Elijah was not God's design for him. It was the thing God moved to correct. Part of what you are carrying right now may not just be the weight of your circumstances, but the isolation of carrying it alone, the belief that this has to be a solo endurance test when it was never meant to be one. Philippians chapter 4 holds a promise that gets quoted often, sometimes too quickly, like a band-aid stretched over a wound it was never meant to cover. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But notice what comes just before it, because context changes everything. Paul writes about contentment in both abundance and need, having learned the secret of being content whatever the circumstances. This was not written by someone who had it easy. Paul wrote those words from prison in chains, uncertain whether he would live or die. The strength he describes is not the strength of someone who has everything together. It is the strength available to someone who has run completely out of his own resources, and discovered that Christ's strength was never meant to supplement his own. It was meant to replace the need for his own entirely. This is what I want you to hear, gently but clearly. The verse is not I can hold on through my own willpower if I just try hard enough. It is I can do all things through the one who strengthens me, meaning the strength was never supposed to come primarily from inside you in the first place. You have been trying to hold on using a kind of strength you were never designed to manufacture alone. No wonder it has run out. No wonder you feel like there is nothing left. You were never meant to be the source. You were only ever meant to be the vessel, and vessels need to be filled again and again by something outside themselves. Romans chapter 8 offers another layer, one that speaks directly into the loneliness of exhaustion. It says the Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Read that slowly. There is a kind of prayer happening on your behalf right now that does not require you to have the energy to form it yourself. When you are too tired to pray with words, when all you can manage is a sigh, a silent collapse onto your bed at the end of another day you barely survived, that groan is not a failure of faith. It may be the exact form prayer is taking in you right now, with the Spirit translating what you cannot articulate into something God receives fully. You do not have to perform eloquence to be heard. Sometimes the most honest prayer you can offer is simply still being here, still breathing even when you don't have the words. I want to offer you something practical now, not a list, not steps to check off, but quiet ways this truth might actually live in your day. What if, tonight, instead of the prayer you usually rush through before sleep takes over, you simply said this: God, I am too tired to hold on tonight, so I am asking you to hold this instead. No performance. No polished language. Just the honest handoff of weight you were never meant to carry entirely alone. What if tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before the demands of the day start pulling at you, you gave yourself 60 seconds of genuine stillness, not to accomplish anything spiritually impressive, but simply to let your body register for 1 full minute that it is not currently required to perform. Elijah was given rest before he was given a mission. Maybe you need that same order. Rest first, not as a reward for finally managing everything, but as the thing that comes before you're asked to do anything else at all. And what if, this week, you let one person know the truth, not the polished version, not I'm just a little tired, but the real sentence. I am more exhausted than I know how to say, and I don't think I can keep holding this by myself. That sentence might feel terrifying to say out loud. It might feel like admitting defeat. But Elijah did not heal in isolation. God sent him Elisha. The isolation was never the plan for you either, even though exhaustion has a way of convincing you that asking for help is its own kind of weakness. Here is a story I want to bring fully into the light because I think you need to see yourself inside it. There is a woman in the Gospels who had been bleeding for 12 years. 12 years of a body that would not cooperate, of doctors who could not fix her, of spending everything she had trying to find relief that never came. By the time we meet her in Scripture, she is not just physically depleted. She is socially isolated, considered unclean by the religious laws of her time, unable to fully participate in community, unable to even touch another person without making them, by the standards of her culture, unclean as well. Imagine that particular exhaustion, not just the physical drain of 12 years of bleeding, but the loneliness of 12 years of being untouchable, of having no one allowed close enough to hold her hand. And then she hears that Jesus is passing through her town, surrounded as always by a crushing crowd. She does not have the strength for a dramatic encounter. She does not have the social standing to approach him directly and ask for what she needs. What she has is just enough strength for one quiet, desperate act. She thinks to herself, if I can only touch the edge of his cloak, I will be healed. Not a bold declaration. Not a public plea. Just a whispered hope, carried out in the smallest possible gesture, because that whispered hope was all the strength she had left. Picture the scene fully. The crowd is pressing in from every direction, loud, chaotic, urgent, everyone wanting something from this man who has become famous for healing the sick. Somewhere in that crush of bodies, a woman who has spent 12 years being pushed to the margins of her own community finds the smallest possible opening, reaches out one trembling hand and touches the hem of his garment. That's it. That's the entirety of her effort. Not a sermon, not a performance of faith, just a hand reaching out from the very last reserves of strength she had. And immediately, the text says immediately, she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. 12 years, ended in the time it takes to brush fabric with your fingertips. But what happens next is, I think, the part that matters most for you right now. Jesus stops. In the middle of a crushing, chaotic crowd, with people pressing against him from every side, he stops and asks, "Who touched me?" His disciples are confused. Everyone is touching him. How could he possibly isolate one touch among hundreds? But Jesus knew. He felt power go out from him, and he stopped everything to find her. The woman, trembling, knowing she could not stay hidden, came forward and fell at his feet, and told him the whole truth. Not the polished version. The whole truth, the years of bleeding, the years of suffering, the desperation that drove her to reach for him in secret. And Jesus did not rebuke her for interrupting him. He did not seem annoyed that she had pulled his attention away from the more important people clearly waiting for him. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Daughter. Not woman. Not stranger. A word that pulls her, in that single moment, into the kind of belonging she had been excluded from for 12 long years. The exhaustion of being unseen, untouched, unwanted by her own community, ended not just in physical healing, but in the restoration of relationship and identity. Jesus did not just stop her bleeding. He saw her, named her, and welcomed her back into community in front of everyone who had previously treated her as untouchable. I think you are this woman in more ways than you might realize. You have been carrying something for so long that it has started to feel permanent, started to feel like the defining fact of who you are rather than something happening to you. And somewhere along the way you may have stopped expecting anyone, even God, to stop in the middle of everything else happening and notice you specifically. But this story tells us something essential about how God moves. In the middle of the crowd, in the middle of the noise, in the middle of everyone else's needs pressing in from every side, Jesus stopped for one exhausted, isolated person who reached out with the very last of her strength. You may feel like you have almost nothing left to reach with. Like the woman in that crowd, you may not have the strength for a bold, public declaration of faith. You may only have enough for the smallest gesture, a whispered prayer, a single honest sentence to God, a reaching out that feels more like desperation than confidence. That is enough. It was enough for her. The text does not say her faith was impressive in its strength. It says her faith, however small, however quiet, was enough to receive what she needed. This is what I want you to carry forward from her story into your own exhaustion. You do not need a dramatic spiritual breakthrough to be seen by God. You do not need to muster some reserve of strength you do not have in order to qualify for His attention. You need only reach, however weakly, however quietly, and trust that the one who stopped in the middle of a crushing crowd for one tired, isolated woman is the same one who notices you now, in whatever crowd of obligations and exhaustion you are currently being pressed by. Isaiah 40 offers a promise that speaks directly into the kind of fatigue we have been naming this whole time, the kind that doesn't lift no matter how much you rest, the kind that seems to live deeper than sleep can reach. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Notice the order in that promise. Soaring comes first, then running, then walking. We tend to think of strength as building gradually, small steps before big ones. But this passage suggests something different, that sometimes renewal arrives suddenly, like an eagle catching an updraft it didn't create, lifted by something outside itself rather than earned through gradual effort. And then, eventually, that same renewed strength sustains even the slowest, most ordinary parts of life. The walking, the simply continuing, the getting through one more unremarkable day without collapsing. This is what renewal means in this passage. Not the absence of tiredness forever, not a permanent high maintained through sheer willpower. It is a renewable resource, available again to those who hope. Not those who perform, not those who never falter, but those who keep turning their hope back toward God even when their strength has completely run out. The eagle does not flap harder to rise. It finds the current that was already there, waiting to carry it, and simply stops fighting long enough to be lifted. I wonder what it would look like for you to stop flapping for just a moment. Not to give up, that's a different thing entirely, but to stop relying on your own effort as the only mechanism keeping you afloat, and instead let yourself be lifted by something you did not create and cannot manufacture through sheer will. The strength you have been searching for inside yourself, the reserve you keep hoping to find if you just dig deep enough, may not be there because it was never meant to be generated from within you in the first place. It was always meant to be received. Psalm 34 offers one more piece of this picture, a verse that names suffering honestly rather than minimizing it. The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. Notice what this verse does not promise. It does not promise an absence of trouble, or that faithful people get to skip the long seasons of carrying more than feels survivable. What it promises is presence within the trouble, and deliverance through it, not necessarily around it. The psalm goes on to say that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Crush. That is not a soft word. That is the precise word for what you may be feeling right now, not merely tired but crushed, flattened under a weight that has been pressing down for far too long. And the promise is not that God stands at a comfortable distance from crushed people, waiting for them to recover before approaching. The promise is that God is closest, specifically, to those who are crushed. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I think it is the truth your exhaustion has been quietly hiding from you. You may have started to believe that your tiredness has put distance between you and God, that somehow, in running out of strength, you have also run out of His attention, His nearness, His willingness to meet you where you are. But the psalm says the opposite. The crushing itself is not a barrier to His nearness. It is, somehow, the very condition under which His nearness is promised most specifically. There is a particular lie that exhaustion tells, and I want to name it precisely because precision matters here. The lie is this: if you were truly faithful, you would not feel this tired. If your prayer life were stronger, this wouldn't still be so hard. This lie takes your exhaustion, something physiological and circumstantial, and turns it into evidence of spiritual failure. It is not true. Elijah had just witnessed fire fall from heaven, and he still collapsed under a tree wanting to die. The woman with the issue of blood had spent everything she had for 12 years, faithfully seeking healing the entire time, and she was still bleeding when she reached for Jesus' cloak. Exhaustion is not evidence of unfaithfulness. Sometimes it is simply the cost of having carried something real for a long time without enough support. So let me say the words now, the ones I held back earlier, because I think you are ready to actually receive them. You are not alone in this. Not in some abstract greeting card sense, but in the specific sense that the God who sent an angel to feed Elijah, who stopped in a crushing crowd for one bleeding woman, who promises nearness specifically to the crushed in spirit, that same God is present in the exact exhaustion you are carrying tonight. Not waiting for you to fix yourself first. Not requiring you to hold on a little longer before He'll show up. Already here, already near, already aware of every specific weight you have been too tired to even name out loud. I want to ask you something gently because I think it matters more than it might seem. What would it look like to let go of just one thing you have been holding, not everything, not all at once, but one single thing, and trust that it will not all collapse if you do? Maybe it is the expectation that you have to respond to every message the moment it arrives. Maybe it is the belief that asking for help makes you a burden. Maybe it is simply permission to cry without immediately apologizing for it. Holding on does not have to mean holding everything all the time with equal intensity. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is set one piece down, and discover the ground did not actually give way beneath you. If you are still reading this, still listening to this voice speak into whatever room you are sitting in right now, I want you to know that the fact you have kept going this far, through everything that has worn you down, is not nothing. It is not weakness that you are tired. It would be strange if you weren't, given everything you have carried. The exhaustion is not a sign that you have failed to trust God enough. It may simply be the honest cost of love, of responsibility, of years spent caring for people and circumstances that have not always cared for you back in equal measure. Let's pray together now, quietly, the way you might speak to someone sitting right beside you. God, we come to you tonight more tired than we know how to put into words. We have been holding on for so long that we have almost forgotten what it feels like not to. We confess that we have started to believe the lie that our exhaustion means something is wrong with our faith. Help us release that lie tonight. We think of Elijah under his tree, asking you to let him rest, and we ask for that same mercy. Before you ask anything else of us, let us simply be fed. Let us simply be allowed to sleep. We are not asking for a miracle that erases every hard thing in our lives. We are asking for the strength that comes quietly, the way it came to him, through care, through rest, through a whisper instead of a storm. We think of the woman who reached for the hem of your garment with the very last of her strength, and we ask you to receive whatever small trembling reach we have left in us tonight. We may not have words. We may only have a sigh, a silence, A single tear we've been holding back for longer than we can remember. Receive that as our prayer. Let it be enough, the way her small reach was enough. We lay down the belief that we have to hold everything together by ourselves. We lay down the fear that if we stop gripping so tightly, everything will fall apart. We ask you to hold what we cannot hold any longer tonight. The relationships that feel strained, the bodies that won't cooperate, the waiting that has gone on so much longer than we expected it to. Renew our strength, not as something we have to earn through more effort, but as something we receive simply because we are still here, still reaching, still whispering your name even when we are this tired. Let us rise like the eagle, not through our own striving, but lifted by a current we did not create. And tonight let us simply rest. Not perform faith. Not hold ourselves together for anyone watching. Just rest, the way Elijah rested, the way you have always intended for your children to rest, even, especially, in the middle of seasons that have not yet ended. We ask this in the quiet confidence that you are near to us, especially now, especially crushed, especially tired. Amen. There is an image I want to leave with you before you go on with whatever is left of today. Picture the eagle again, not flapping frantically against the wind, but finding the place where the current rises, and simply letting go of its own effort long enough to be carried. You have been flapping for a long time. Your hands have probably forgotten what it feels like to be open. Tonight, just for a moment, you are invited to stop flapping. Not to fall. To be lifted instead by a strength you did not manufacture and do not have to maintain alone. The current was always there. You only had to stop fighting it long enough to feel it carry you.